Okay, welcome. I am Dame Callandra from the County of Ravens Cross in the Kingdom of the Golden Plains, and we're going to talk about metal tooling or metal embossing. Uh, make shiny designs on metal. It's a very simple thing to do with simple materials that you may already have around your house. Uh, the metal usually is somewhere between 36 to 40 gauge aluminum or copper. So a soda can would work. I personally do not trust myself trying to cut open a soda can, so I bought a roll of metal that you can get on Amazon for like $10. I don't remember how many feet of it, but I've made several things and I still have some left, so that's a easy thing to get. But you can carefully cut open a soda can. If you do decide to do that or anything you're cutting, get some cut resistant gloves because those fine little shards of metal can do some damage there, so just be careful. Other basic tools that you would need are some of the tortillon or however you want to spell it that you usually use for drawing. This is just like the paper little nubs that are used for blending. These are useful. Also, embossing tools come in many different varieties and shapes. Uh, if you do any leather work, you probably already have some. You have different shaped balls on the end, paper embossing, leather embossing tools. They're all the same thing. Also, if you look up nail art as a search, and you'll find all the little nail art tools. Those are often cheaper than the ones that are for leather, and they work just fine. You can get a set for about $5, $6. Uh, Instead of using the paper blending stuff, you can also get some nylon ones. If you search for metal embossing tools or tooling metal, and you can find some things on there. Some other helpful tools. We go into my leatherwork stuff here. The little wheels that you use for making the stitching marks to be able to make your holes even on leather work really well for this, for making some raised little dot designs. Those come in different sizes and shapes and patterns too. I'm going to share a link to a site that has some helpful information and blog posts, as well as where you can get some supplies. So I'll go ahead and put that in there. I'm going to go ahead and switch the camera here. So some people ask what the difference is between embossing and debossing. So embossing is when you start working from the back of your piece and would put your lines from the back and start and try to push up, like how I have these hearts are indented, and that's being pushed from the back. It's raising it up. So embossing, you're raising things up. Debossing is when you're pushing things down from the front of your piece. A lot of leather tooling is done as debossing, essentially, when you're working from the front of the piece and pushing it down. Now, other terms of metalwork that you may hear are repoussé and chasing, which are similar concepts usually done with heavier gauge metals, but you would have a bowl of tar pitch that's heated up, and repoussé, you're working from the back of the metal with that. Chasing is when you're working on the top of the metal to create your designs, but that's usually the heavier gauge stuff. Instead of a tar pitch, what we're using right now is I've got 3 layers of fun foam, craft foam on here, because you need something that has a little bit of give, so that when you're pushing things down, it's not flattening it at the same time, because a hard surface won't work. Some other things that you can use are several layers of paper towels or an actual towel, but you do want to have a firm surface under that though. But you do need to have something with a little bit of give. But the foam is a really cheap thing that's easy to get. You could probably also, amp gardeners tend to have camp foam around. You could use a piece of camp foam. Some other things that you'll need to get started that are helpful is a brayer. It's not required, but it's helpful for trying to flatten out your metal after you've cut it, which you can cut with a pair of scissors. When you're talking 36 gauge to 40 gauge, it's easy to just cut that with scissors. And so I'm just going to take the brayer to try to flatten out. It helps if I do it on the other side. You can work it with your hands too. If you're using an aluminum can and you don't have a brayer, you can gently work it. I do suggest wearing gloves when you're doing that to just try to flatten things out a little bit. So we're just kind of rolling over that. If you had a rolling pin that you use for crafts, do not use something that you use for food. You could probably use that too. You just want something that's not going to mark your surface. So that's why I'm using the rubber brayer. Some other basic things that you may want to use as having some stencils. Let's try mixing that up a little bit. So you can use stencils. You can print off a picture and tape it to your piece, and you can draw your design over that. You can be like how I often am and just freehand draw things. A ballpoint pen is useful for transferring designs. I don't actually really have those around. So another thing that I use is I have this wooden stiletto thing. This actually came with a clayboard art set that I use because I do clayboard scratch art. But you could also probably use a bamboo skewer, or you can use a really fine one of the embossing tools that are about the size of a ballpoint pen. But I know most people have ballpoint pens. I'm just an odd person that doesn't really keep those around. If you're using a stencil, I do recommend taping it down to your piece. But I'm just going to do a little freehand drawing of something just to get things started. Actually, so this is the back of my piece. So I'm just going to draw a simple shape. I find starting with some basic shapes is a good thing to just get an idea of how things work. Metal can be a little tough, like leather. Sometimes whatever you're using to draw on may get stuck in a little kind of a grain. There is a little bit of that to it, that it'll decide it wants to slide. It doesn't want to move. So just be careful and go slow. There we go. So I drew this from the back. Now I'm going to take it to the front. And I'm going to trace along the outside of my line. There's a little indentation that you use as a guide, and you just put the tool and gently, slowly trace the outside of that. And that will help raise things up and accentuate a little bit. I'm going to do that with my other shape that I drew. And there it slid on me. And so you have a little bit of a raised design there. Now, when you go to the back, this is where you could use a little tool like this, or that's where you switch to one of the paper blending sticks. They come in different sizes. And I'm going to go along the inside now of that line. And it just starts to smooth it out to raise it up a little bit. So now I've got a little raised shape, and you could leave that. But if you want to go a little farther, you can use some of the embossing ball tools and make it deeper and raise it up more. Now you do have to be careful with these because you can go too far and make a hole. And I am really good at making holes in my metal. So you have to be careful with it. Now this one is leaving some marks that are going to be a little visible on the other side. So I'm going to try using the bigger end I have now. And you can really get these in a variety of sizes. I just ordered a set that's a jumbo set. Another thing you can look at for tools is search mandala drawing. And I just ordered a set that had several different sizes of the ball tools. It came with the stencils and also came with some brushes. And that's a good resource to start with too, if you're wanting to spend a little bit more money and have a multi-purpose set that's good for a lot of different crafts. So we're just going around and raising that up. And so you can see the lines there. So you could leave that. You can also smooth those out a little bit with the going over it with the paper blending stub. My large one fell on the floor, so that's why I'm not using that one at the moment. Another thing that I've used is the modeling spoons, for often used with leatherwork. So I have a bunch of those laying around. If you have a tip of a spoon or something that you don't use for food, you could try using that for trying to smooth things out a little bit and make things even. You can really raise this up quite a bit, but it's going to just take some trial and error and see how far you can push things. So it didn't smooth things out a whole lot, but it smooths things out a little bit on there. That's the basics of getting started with that. I'm going to show a little bit more with using the stencil. So I have this taped down because stencils like to move. And so I did my basic tracing along everything on here. So let's go ahead and get that taken off. And really, depending on what you're wanting to do with the piece, you could leave it just at the basic and it's a nice little raised thing. Some options that you can do with these pieces is you could attach it to a wooden box. You could frame a piece. I've seen some where they've made Christmas ornaments where they back it with another piece of metal to help reinforce things, or you could glue it to a piece of leather. And that's a good way. I'm just using simple masking tape or painter's tape. So a lot of people that do a lot of craft, we tend to have that around because it's good for just about everything that doesn't need to be permanent. Okay. So this is just the simple trace line. So that's my back. We're going to go to the front. Now, when you have a detailed piece like this is where you have to start to think of how you want to raise things up. What's going to be your negative space? Because it can go a lot of different directions on it. So that's some things you have to think about. I do recommend starting with some less detailed pieces. But once again, when you're just tracing around those lines, that helps to accentuate things. And it's just a simple thing. It's just pretty much you're just drawing gently on the metal. But don't forget that foam pad. I made that mistake and it doesn't work well if you don't have the foam underneath it. Now, some things that you can do if you are the type of person that's concerned that you're going to cut yourself, you can tape the edges as you're working. Just put tape around the edges to help protect things. So that's something that if you're working with kids, absolutely do that. There's certain other people sometimes that you shouldn't give sharp objects to. Something else that you can do that you may want to do if you're cutting things to size to start with, you could go ahead and finish the edges when you're working. And what I did is I took a straight edge and just used my little wooden stylus and drew a line. So it's kind of a little scoring line. And then you can gently push that over. Yeah, this one's not cooperating very much right now. But you just kind of, sorry, my camera's trying to move. Trying to see if you can see this here. There we go. So I'll lay that down. So you can just push along that line and then just kind of push it down in some places. This is where the modeling spoons can be useful, or if you've got another sort of like bone tool or creaser or something like that would work as well. Something that's flat that you can use to just push it down and it's just simply fold it over. So then if you were going to attach this to something or frame it, you've got a nice smooth edge there. Now, I was talking before about getting the dot effects. So that is a fun thing to play with. Now on the website I gave you, they're pretty expensive for this type of tool, and they're giving a fancy name. You'll probably find it cheaper if you're looking at a leather working shop, Tandy, or on Amazon. And you can do gentle curves with that, and that will make the raised dots on the outside. If you did it on the top of your work, that also will create something that so it'll be recessed on the outside. So you can play with doing that too. You can play with doing a different combinations of embossing and debossing. Sometimes for good effects, you can just take a little embossing tool and you can just make some dots, and kind of like the background tools with leather working. And you can create some little pattern like that. Sometimes you may want to have some recessed lines on the top for a design. So you can do that too, just making some little lines. So you can have some variety there. This is one that I was working on. There we go. That some of my dots here in the center are I worked from the top, and same with the ones that are around each of the little petals. You do have to be careful though. So I did make some holes right here, which is hard to see. So that's one good thing. If it's going to be framed or from a distance, they may not necessarily see your holes. Be very careful when you're trying to push things down or make dots that you don't end up going onto one of your areas that you've already raised up, which is what happened to me there. And I have one that, this one, you can see that really raised up area, that's actually a big hole in it because I went too far. But this one, sorry, I have to manually hold my camera. You can kind of see how raised up that heart is. So you can go pretty far with it. Now, when you would have things that are raised up, you do need to fill in the back because over time it will start to fall in on itself. So what I've used on the back of this is Merc Arts filling paste, which is on the website that I sent you to. There's some other things that you can do that you can mix up yourself. I recommend looking up some different recipes for it. But some things that I've seen suggested are mixing a little bit of glue and plaster of Paris, using a wax, but there's a certain type of wax. You would have to search that to see which one would work best. Anything that's kind of filling, you could use some glue, but it would be better if it was mixed with a little bit of something like sawdust or something like that. I know when you emboss leather, because some people do this on leather at work from the back, they have to make a little paste to fill it. Somebody suggested caulk. You could try that and see. I don't know how expensive that would be. You don't necessarily have to fill in the whole area, but you need something that gets a little bit hard so that it has some stability. So, okay, we have our pretty shiny objects. But then you want to make sure you want to try to accent things so that you can see some of the lines better. There are some different things that you can use. I've experimented with several different things to see what might work. One thing you can get is Gilder's paste. It is fairly expensive, so I was looking at some other cheaper options, but it is highly recommended by a lot of people. If you search on Pinterest with metal tooling and metal embossing, you will find a whole lot of things out there. But Gilder's paste is a wax that's usually colored, and you rub it over things, and then you can take away your excess with a paper towel or soft cloth or a clean brush. Rub and buff is another one. These colored areas that I have, these are actually from a cheap set that I found on Amazon. It's okay. It leaves a little bit, but some of them just kind of look dirty, really. So I wasn't very happy with the results of that. I've shown people say you can use Sharpie, but I do not like the look of Sharpie on metal. It just doesn't, it looks fake. It doesn't look like it belongs. Uh, you can do some acrylic paint. I haven't experimented with that. What I found that I like best is actually India ink. I have a bottle of a brand that I don't like using for calligraphy, and so I finally found a use for it. And that will simply rub away, really. Uh, so you do have to be careful. It's not really all that permanent, but you can still kind of rub things off or sand it off a little bit from the areas that you don't want. But
What
that,
about nail polish? Would that work as like an enamel effect?
you could try that, but because it dries really fast, you would want to probably rub off some of your excess while it's still wet.
Mhm.
But I can see that working because that's similar to some other things. I know some people have had results with using alcohol inks on metal for doing engraving, and I think that would probably work. It's just the only color alcohol inks I have are kind of neon color, and I didn't really want to use that. I'm gonna show a bigger piece I have with the ink, but I need to hide part of it because it's a scroll that I made for later. Which, if you're doing letters, I kind of did it the wrong way because trying to manually uh, reverse the images for letters was something I couldn't really do. So my letters are kind of recessed, but this is with the ink on it, and I think that really brought out everything fairly well. Watch things with lots of detail. The Golden Plains Heraldry has a lot of detail on it, and that was a very ambitious thing of trying to tool, and I did that freehand because I'm strange that way. I like to freehand draw things and see what happens. Kind of came out, but so there's a lot of different things that you can do and try. I know that if you do some searching, that you can also find how to make little boxes. I haven't tried that yet because I'm not good at cutting things out straight. It's my little crafty secret there that I'm horrible at that. So this is where I'm saying where this side here is done with the wax base, and it just kind of it gives a subtle look, but it was looking dirty to me. And this is the gold in the middle, and you can't really see it very well. Versus this side is the ink side, so you can see the difference between the ink and the wax. But acanthus leaves are fun. Okay, so that's the basics of this. It's a very simple thing to get started. I actually just started doing this. Oh, did not see that. Just started doing this after taking a class a couple weeks ago from somebody who had just learned how to do it to teach the class. So nice simple thing to get started. Yeah. Can we stop recording now, Alana?